No one came. That's what I heard them whisper, loud enough for it to slice through the walls of my brand new kitchen. Not even an hour into my housewarming, and the words hit harder than any storm I've weathered in my 65 years. His is not just a story, it's a journey through betrayal, silence, and ultimate revenge. Watch closely, because every detail matters. I stood by the sink, polishing the same clean glass over and over, my hands steady though my chest felt like it might burst. They thought I hadn't noticed that their laughter carried harmlessly across the yard, but I caught every word. Every chuckle. Every cruel little jab. And here's the part they didn't know. I was listening closer than they imagined. It was 7:46 p.m. on a Thursday early fall, the kind of evening where the air smells faintly of burnt leaves and damp soil. I had baked pies that afternoon, laid out casseroles the way my mother once did when family filled every corner of the house. I had cleaned every inch until the windows gleamed so bright I could see the fading pink of the sky in them. This was supposed to be my night. 7 years of clipping coupons, 7 years of living small while everyone else flashed their vacations and remodels. 7 years and finally, I had the keys to this little house with the wide porch and the oak tree that still held a tire swing. But the chairs I'd lined up around my kitchen table stayed empty. The pie cooled untouched. And instead of congratulations, what filled the air was that ugly sound drifting through the open window. Muffled snickers, the clink of glasses from across the street. They hadn't just skipped my celebration. They had thrown one of their own. I didn't storm over. Oh no. I dried my hands on a dish towel and poured myself a glass of iced tea, the lemon wedge floating just so. Calm. Always calm. They mistook my quietness for weakness, but quiet is just another word for listening. And tonight I had more to listen to than ever. The back porch light flickered, buzzing like a fly caught in a jar. I noted it absently. My late husband used to fix things like that before the cancer took him. I'd been learning since. Wires, breakers, pipes, and most of the neighborhood still thought I was helpless without him. I smiled at the thought. Let them. Because here's what they didn't see. Tucked neatly in my sewing basket in the corner was a set of notes. Years of them. Scribbled observations, overheard remarks, details most folks forget by morning. I never forgot. Some people collect stamps, I collected truths. At exactly 8:12 p.m., I heard the shrill laugh of Marjorie, my oldest neighbor, the one who had hugged me the week before and promised she'd bring her famous potato salad. My ears pricked. Empty chairs, she giggled to the group. Like a church service in August. The others roared. I steadied my breathing, pressing one palm against the counter's cool laminate. It wasn't the words that stung the most. It was the ease of them. The way betrayal rolled off their tongues like they'd practiced it. And then I noticed something odd. Through the half-closed blinds I could just barely make out the reflection of cell phone screens, faces glowing in the dark. They weren't only laughing, they were recording. That explained the strange vibration I'd felt in my pocket earlier, a group text left unopened. They wanted me to see their absence, to watch my own humiliation ripple across the neighborhood in little blue bubbles. My daughter Ellen walked in at that moment holding her coffee cup too tightly. She had come early to help me set up, and I'd seen the guilt in her eyes when no one arrived. Now she looked pale, almost green under the kitchen light. "They're not worth it, Mama," she whispered, placing a hand on my arm. "Don't look out the window." But I already had. Her eyes flicked down to her phone screen and for just a second, just one, I saw it. A message half-typed then quickly deleted. She turned the screen away but I'd caught enough. A date, a time, and a name that didn't belong in any friendly conversation. I said nothing. Silence is sharper than accusation. She shifted under the weight of it, then busied herself with rearranging napkins that didn't need rearranging. That was my second clue of the night. The first clue had been the laughter. The second was my daughter's unease. The third came moments later, carried on the evening breeze. A car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps crunched over gravel. I thought for a heartbeat that someone had finally decided to honor my invitation, but no knock came to my door. Instead, I heard my neighbor Gary's booming laugh join the others across the street. I leaned against the counter, swirling the melting ice in my glass. That sound, his voice, unlocked a memory I had tucked away 20 years ago. Gary arguing over fence lines with my late husband, threatening to take us to court. The case had fizzled but not the grudge. Clearly grudges live longer than people. I pressed my lips together, piecing it together like a quilt. Ellen's nervous message. Gary's sudden appearance. The laughter sharpened with malice. There was more here than a missed invitation. The clock on the wall ticked toward 9 p.m., every second drawing out the humiliation. I paced the kitchen, fingers brushing the lace curtain my sister had sent last Christmas. I thought of calling her, of spilling it all, but something in me tightened instead. I would not cry on the phone. I would not give them that power. Instead, I let my eyes wander to the corner shelf, where my husband's old toolbox sat, still dented from years of use. Most folks thought I kept it there for nostalgia. They didn't know the truth. Inside that box wasn't just hammers and nails. There were documents, copies, and a few little things my husband had left me with a half smile and the words, "You'll know when to use them." Well, maybe I did. The laughter rose again, louder this time, followed by the clatter of bottles on their porch table. I caught snippets. My name, my house, jokes about buying friends with casseroles. Each word etched itself into me, not like a wound but like a blueprint. I rinsed the glass I'd been holding, set it upside down on the drying rack, and smoothed the dish towel across the counter. Order, control, composure. They could mock my empty chairs, but they couldn't touch my calm. I glanced at Ellen. She was watching me too closely, like she expected me to break. Instead, I smiled. Slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Why are you smiling, Mama?" she asked. "Because," I said softly, "they just reminded me how much they underestimate me." Her brow furrowed, but I turned away, flipping off the porch light so the kitchen fell into shadows. The night ended not with cheers or hugs, but with me standing at the window, curtain pulled just enough to lock eyes with Marjorie across the street. She froze mid-laugh when she saw me. Our gazes held, her smirk faltering. I tilted my head as though studying a puzzle piece that finally fit. Then I closed the curtain slowly, deliberately, like a woman sealing a chapter. No shouting. No tears. Just silence, heavy and deliberate. But make no mistake. In that silence I made my promise. I let the curtain fall and the room went dim, their laughter muffled by glass and fabric. My heart slowed, but not to calm. To calculate. To wait. That night I slept little. I lay on the couch instead of the new bed, the tick of the hallway clock sharp as a metronome. By dawn my decision was set. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't plead. I'd watch, I'd listen, and I'd let their own secrets surface. They always did, eventually. The morning air was brisk when I stepped outside in my robe, coffee steaming in my hand. The street was still, save for a crow perched on the mailbox, pecking at something shiny wedged inside. I shooed it away, and when I opened the little metal door I froze. There was an envelope. No return address. The paper slightly yellowed, edges crisp like it had been handled too carefully or maybe not carefully enough. I held it against my palm and noticed faint smudges of ink, a hand unsteady but familiar. I didn't tear it open right there. Oh. I slid it under my robe pocket and carried it back to the kitchen, set it on the table and stared at it as though it might breathe. When I finally opened it, the paper whispered like brittle leaves. The handwriting was shaky, curved in a way I hadn't seen in years, and though no name was signed, I knew. My husband's old friend, the one who used to linger too long at our fence, the one I thought had drifted away after the court threats. His hand. His temper tucked into every uneven loop of his letters. "You don't know the half of it." That was the first line. The rest was a tangle of accusations, half-truths, and something worse. Evidence. Numbers, dates, a hint that my neighbors hadn't just avoided me. They'd been busy. Aligning themselves, covering tracks, passing favors that would have looked harmless if not stacked together. I felt the blood drain from my face. The betrayal wasn't casual cruelty. It was calculated. Organized. And if this letter was right, my daughter's uneasy text wasn't guilt about friends skipping pie. It was fear of being pulled into something bigger. The knock at my door startled me. I stuffed the letter into my apron pocket before answering. On my porch stood a figure I hadn't expected to see again. Carl Henderson. My late husband's so-called friend. His shoulders hunched with age now, but his eyes carried the same old steel. "Morning, Ruth," he said, voice too casual. "Thought I'd check how the house is settling." I tightened the robe tie at my waist. "The house is fine. What do you want, Carl?" His gaze flicked past me into the living room, lingering on the empty chairs I hadn't yet put away. "Heard last night didn't go as you planned." Something in my chest twisted, but I held steady. "You seem to know a lot for someone who wasn't invited." Pause. Then a smile thin as paper. Neighbors talk. He shifted his weight, his boots creaking on the porch boards. You ought to be careful who you trust. Folks round here keep score longer than you think. And just like that he tipped his cap and walked back down the steps, leaving muddy prints I'd have to scrub later. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. The letter in my pocket felt heavier. He wanted me to know just enough to doubt everyone, but not enough to see his part. That was clue number 4. The day dragged on. Ellen called around noon, her voice too bright, asking if I needed help cleaning up. I told her no, and she hesitated just a second too long before saying goodbye. I knew that tone. A daughter who wanted to confess something but couldn't. Instead of pacing, I baked. My mother always said you can sift anger the same way you sift flour. A little at a time until the lumps are gone. The smell of cinnamon filled the house, warm, steady. Gave me time to think. When I pulled the pie from the oven, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Not Carl this time, but 2 of the women who had laughed loudest the night before, walking past with grocery bags. Their voices carried. Did you see her face? One said. Like she didn't know, the other replied. Bless her heart. They laughed, softer than last night but still sharp enough to cut. I stayed behind the curtain, unseen. Let them think I was broken. Let them. That evening the wind picked up. Leaves swirled in small tornadoes across the yard, tapping against the porch like restless fingers. I turned on the lamp by the window and unfolded the letter again, tracing the numbers and notes Carl had scribbled. Some of it didn't make sense yet, property lines, transactions, debts owed, but enough did. Enough to see that last night's betrayal wasn't spontaneous. It was protection. They hadn't stayed away because they disliked me. They had stayed away because they feared what I might stumble upon now that I lived here. At 7:15 p.m. I heard it again, footsteps on the porch. This time no knock. Just the weight of someone lingering. I gripped the edge of the curtain, holding my breath. A shadow stretched across the boards, tall, unmoving. Then the faint creak of wood like someone shifting their stance. I waited. Minutes passed. Finally, the shadow slipped away, leaving the porch groaning in relief. When I opened the door, no one was there. But tucked beneath the doormat was another slip of paper. Smaller, folded twice. Ask about the fund. That was all it said. I sat at the table, both notes spread out before me, the lamplight casting them in gold. My mind raced. A fund. Hidden money. Neighbors guarding secrets bigger than birthday snubs or potato salad. And suddenly the empty chairs around my table felt less like rejection and more like strategy. They weren't avoiding me. They were keeping me out. But here's what they forgot. I had nothing left to lose. I pressed the letters flat, slid them into a plastic sleeve from an old photo album, and tucked them back into the toolbox where no one would think to look. Then I washed my hands, dried them carefully, and pulled on my cardigan. The night was young. The grocery store still open. And women who gossip always gossip in pairs. It was time I listened closer. The cardigan hugged my shoulders as I locked the front door, toolbox secrets safe inside. The night carried the smell of rain on asphalt, that damp sweetness that settles in your throat. The grocery store sign glowed in the distance like a lighthouse. Flickering, humming, ordinary. I drove slow. Not because of traffic but because my thoughts ran ahead of me, tumbling over one another. Ask about the fund. That single sentence sat heavy in my mind. A warning or a dare? I couldn't tell. By the time I pulled into the nearly empty lot, the streetlights buzzed low, moths swirling under their glow. I took a deep breath, grabbed my list. A prop, nothing more, and walked through the sliding doors. Inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright, the air too cold. The place smelled of overripe bananas and floor cleaner. I grabbed a basket and let the wheels squeak against the linoleum. To anyone watching, I was just another older woman buying bread and milk. But my ears were sharper than my steps. Halfway down the produce aisle, I heard them. 2 voices, familiar, bending around the corner near the tomatoes. I slowed, heart steady, basket pressed to my hip. It was Marjorie and Denise, the very same women who had laughed outside my house the night before. Their voices dropped, but the store carried sound in strange ways. I leaned close to the cucumbers, pretending to check firmness. Did she get the note? Denise whispered. She must have, Marjorie said, sharp as vinegar. Carl wouldn't risk it otherwise. My throat tightened. So Carl wasn't warning me, he was baiting me. I plucked a tomato, rolling it in my hand. Their voices carried on. If the fund comes out, Denise said, we're all done. You know that. Then keep her away from it, Marjorie snapped. She's nosy. Always has been. I placed the tomato gently in my basket, masking the tremor in my hands. Nosy. That's what they called a woman who paid attention. Funny how men in this town got called thorough for the same thing. I kept listening. Besides, Marjorie continued, her daughter's already. She stopped. Pause. Then quieter. Never mind. My pulse thudded in my ears. Already what? Involved? Pressured? Protected? I fought the urge to step out to demand answers right then. Instead, I bent over the bin of green beans, sliding them into a bag as if my whole life depended on vegetables. When they moved on, I followed at a distance, basket light against my arm. I stopped when they stopped, pretending to compare prices on cereal boxes while they debated brands of coffee. Every word was a breadcrumb, but I needed more. That's when a voice startled me. Evening, Ruth, said a man behind me. I turned quickly. It was Pastor Miller, holding a loaf of bread and smiling that tired smile he always wore on Thursdays after Bible study. My relief came too quickly. Evening, Pastor, I said softly. He studied me for a moment, head tilted. You look concerned. I hesitated. Could I trust him? Maybe. Maybe not. I forced a polite laugh. Just trying to decide between oats or wheat. He chuckled, then leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. Careful who you linger near. Folks around here aren't as kind as they seem. Before I could respond, he patted my shoulder and walked away, whistling faintly. Another warning. Or another trap. I found Marjorie and Denise again in the baking aisle. Their backs were to me, shoulders stiff, words sharper now. If Ruth asks, we don't know a thing, Marjorie muttered. Denise sighed. But what if Ellen? Don't, Marjorie snapped. Loose lips, Denise. Loose lips sink ships. I clenched the basket handle so hard my knuckles whitened. Ellen again. My daughter tangled in this web of whispers and half-truths. They moved on. I stayed, pretending to study flower brands while my breath came shallow. Tips. Funds. Notes. My neighbors weren't just gossiping women with time on their hands. They were hiding something real. Something rotten. At the checkout, I trailed behind them. They paid quickly, bags rustling, and hurried out together. I lingered with my basket, adding items I didn't need just to stretch time. When I finally walked back to the lot, their car was gone. The night air had cooled further, sharp with exhaust and damp leaves. I loaded my groceries, then noticed a folded receipt tucked under my wiper blade. I glanced around. No one nearby. Heart pounding, I unfolded it. On the back of the slip, scrawled in that same shaky hand. You're closer than you think. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel. The parking lot hummed with silence, only the buzz of lights overhead. I thought of Carl, of Pastor Miller, of my daughter's nervous glances. Everyone around me seemed to know something I didn't, and yet someone wanted me to catch up. The receipt trembled in my hand, the ink smudged from haste. I slipped it into my purse, locking the doors before starting the car. As I pulled out, headlights flashed in my rearview mirror. A car idled 2 rows back, engine low, lights on. Too still. Watching. I turned left instead of right, taking the long way home. The car followed for 2 blocks before vanishing at the intersection. When I reached my driveway, I sat for a long moment, engine running, groceries cooling in the trunk. The street was quiet, but the oak tree's shadow stretched across the lawn like a warning finger. Inside, I unpacked the groceries slowly, each can and carton a small anchor to normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. My house, my neighbors, even my daughter, all wrapped in secrets I wasn't supposed to touch. I pulled the receipt from my purse and laid it beside the first 2 notes. 3 pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit yet but would. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Ellen, don't go out tomorrow. Promise me. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. My daughter's fear pressed against my chest like a weight. Did she know about the fund? Was she protecting me or protecting herself? I typed back one word, okay. But my fingers shook as I hit send. Because I knew I wouldn't keep that promise. That night I couldn't sleep again. The house groaned in the wind, the oak tree branches scraping against the siding. I lay awake, letters spread across the coffee table, lamp burning low. Every sound felt louder, the hum of the fridge, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of floorboards as the house settled. I kept thinking of those words. You're closer than you think. Closer to what? The fund? The truth about Ellen? Or the reason no one dared step foot in my housewarming? I didn't know yet. But I knew this much. Silence was no longer my shield. It was my weapon. And in the aisles of that grocery store, I'd learned one thing for certain. The cracks in their alliance were already showing. All I had to do was press. Silence was no longer my shield. It was my weapon. And I intended to use it. So when word reached me, whispered by a cashier with eyes too wide, too curious, that Marjorie and the others were holding another of their cozy evening circles, I didn't hesitate. My hands trembled only once when I packed the pie into its tin and slid foil across the top. Hospitality was my disguise and sweetness would be my entry ticket. The walk across the street was short, but each step carried weight. The night air bit sharp against my cheeks, the scent of wood smoke trailing from chimneys. Porch lights glowed warm, inviting, but not for me. Not yet. Their house was alive with chatter, a hum beneath the sound of silverware clinking and wine being poured. I knocked lightly, balancing the pie in my hands. For a moment, silence fell inside. Then the door cracked open. It was Denise who answered, eyes flicking to the pie before darting back to my face. Surprise first, then unease. "Ruth," she said, voice pitched too high. What are you doing here?" I smiled, the same smile I'd worn through years of PTA meetings and church suppers. "Thought I'd bring something by. Didn't want the pie to go to waste." Her hesitation stretched, but politeness won. She opened the door wider. "Of course. Come in." The warmth hit me first, heat from the fireplace heavy with the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread. Their table was set, every seat full, glasses raised mid-laughter until my presence cut the sound. The room stiffened. Marjorie sat at the head, her lips curving into something that tried to pass for a smile. "Well, look who's joined us," she said, voice smooth but tight. I set the pie on the counter, unwrapping the foil with practiced ease. "Didn't want to be rude," I said softly. "Figured neighbors share meals, don't they?" A few nervous chuckles fluttered around the room, but no one answered directly. I took in the details. Papers stacked by the bread basket, not recipes but ledgers half covered by napkins. A pen left uncapped. Their mistake. I sat without waiting for an invitation, folding my hands in my lap. Conversation limped back to life, but quieter now. I watched, listened, and let silence do its work. Every shift of their eyes told me what words didn't. Denise's fingers tapped her wine glass too quickly. Gary wouldn't meet my gaze, his face red from more than drink. Finally, I broke the quiet. "You know," I began, slicing into the pie, "I found something interesting in my mailbox this week." Forks froze midair. Marjorie's hand tightened around her napkin. "Oh," she said lightly. "Catalogs already coming, I imagine." I held her eyes, steady as a surgeon. "Not catalogs. Notes. About a fund." The room stilled. Denise dropped her fork, the clatter loud as thunder. Gary cleared his throat. "People leave all kinds of nonsense in mailboxes," he muttered. "Best ignore it." "Is that so?" I said, laying a neat slice of pie on my plate. Funny how nonsense matches the very words I overheard in the grocery store. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was guilty. Marjorie leaned forward, her voice softer now, threaded with warning. "Ruth, you've been through a lot lately. New house, new responsibilities. Sometimes folks imagine things." Her tone was kind on the surface, but her eyes told a different story. "A dare." "Yes." I didn't rise to it. Instead, I set down my fork and spoke evenly. "I don't imagine numbers written in ink. I don't imagine shadows standing on my porch at night. And I don't imagine my own daughter's name whispered between your sips of coffee." Gasps rippled around the table. Ellen's name had pierced deeper than I intended, but I didn't flinch. Denise's face softened, guilt flashing in her eyes. "Ruth, it's not what you think." "Then explain it," I said calmly, though my pulse hammered. Marjorie's gaze cut across the room, silencing her. "There's nothing to explain." But the tremor in her hand betrayed her. I leaned back, folding my arms. "You know, my husband always told me, people show their hand not in what they say but in what they can't hide." I let the words hang, then added, "And right now your hands are shaking, Marjorie." The group shifted uneasily. Someone coughed. Another poured more wine, glass nearly overflowing. I stood then, smoothing my cardigan. I'll let you finish your evening, I said gently. Wouldn't want to intrude. But as I turned to leave, I paused, looking back over my shoulder. Funny thing though, secrets don't stay tucked away forever. Sooner or later, they end up on someone's porch. The color drained from Denise's cheeks. Gary stared into his plate. Marjorie opened her mouth, but no words came. I walked out with steady steps, pie tin lighter in my hands, though the weight of their fear clung to me like perfume. The cold night air hit me as I stepped onto the porch. I closed the door behind me, the muffled tension inside breaking into whispers the moment I left. Their unity had cracked. I'd seen it in their eyes, heard it in the catch of their voices. On the walk back, my breath clouded white. Porch lights flickered in the distance, shadows stretched long and thin. A neighbor's dog barked once, then quieted. Every detail pressed into me, reminding me I wasn't safe, but I wasn't powerless either. When I reached my house, I set the pie down and locked the door, the sound of the bolt sliding firm. My hands shook only once, not from fear but from certainty. They knew I knew. And now they'd turn on each other. I brewed tea, the kettle's whistle sharp in the quiet. Sitting at the table, I pulled the 3 notes from their sleeve, laying them side by side. Ask about the fund. You don't know the half of it. You're closer than you think. Tonight had confirmed all 3. The fund was real. The secrecy was desperate. And I was closer than they ever wanted me to be. Still, one question burned hotter than the rest. Where did Ellen fit? I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over her number. But before I could dial, the screen lit with a new message. Don't go back there. Please. No name, no number saved. Just those words. I stared at the glow until it dimmed, my reflection staring back at me in the black screen. That night, I left the pie tin empty on the counter, a reminder. Not of generosity wasted, but of a battle line drawn. They hadn't expected me to walk into their circle. They hadn't expected me to sit at their table, piecing their fear together bite by bite. And they certainly hadn't expected me to leave without raising my voice. But silence, I reminded myself, is a sharper weapon than shouting. And tonight I'd cut them deeper than any scream could have. The message glowed in my hand, don't go back there. Please. I stared until the letters blurred. Whoever sent it, they were too late. I had already gone, already cracked their little circle wide open. They knew I had seen through them, and worse, they knew they couldn't scare me quiet. I set the phone face down on the table, its screen going dark, and leaned back in my chair. My heart beat steady. Not the frantic thud of fear, but the deliberate rhythm of someone who knows the game has shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. It was time to end this. The next morning I dressed with care. A simple navy sweater, pearls at my ears, shoes polished. My husband used to say you fight better when you look like you've already won. I carried a small folder under my arm. The letters, the receipt, and copies of the pages I'd found tucked under napkins at Marjorie's table. Numbers, ledgers, transactions that didn't add up. The town hall sat 3 blocks away, its brick walls faded but steady. I walked there slow, each step anchored by the sound of my shoes on the pavement. At my age, people don't expect quick moves. That's what makes patience such a dangerous ally. Inside, the clerk barely looked up from her computer. But when I slid the folder across the counter and spoke, her eyes sharpened. These belong in the right hands, I said. I suggest you call the council. By evening, whispers had already started. Money skimmed from community funds. Promises made and debts hidden. Marjorie's name, Gary's name, Denise's. All floating on the lips of people who had once raised glasses with them. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air, and waited. Not with fear. With certainty. At 7 p.m. sharp, headlights flashed across my window. A knock followed. Ellen stood at the door, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Mom, what did you do?" she whispered the moment I opened. I stepped aside, letting her in. What needed doing? She dropped her purse onto the chair, pressing both hands to her forehead. "They're furious. Marjorie called me. She said you exposed everything." I poured her tea, sliding the cup across the table. "Did I?" I asked. "Or did they expose themselves?" Tears welled in her eyes, but not from sorrow, from something closer to relief. She sank into the chair, shoulders slumping. "I didn't know how to tell you. I got dragged into it months ago. They made me sign papers, said it was for community projects. But I thought it was harmless. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice even. And when you realized it wasn't? I wanted out. But they said if I spoke they'd ruin me. My job, my name. I thought staying quiet would protect us both. I reached across the table, taking her hand. Silence doesn't protect, Ellen. It only shields the guilty. Her tears spilled then, hot against her cheeks. I'm sorry, Mama. I squeezed her hand. Don't be. You've given me all the confirmation I needed. Later that night, I opened my blinds just enough to watch the street. Cars pulled into Marjorie's driveway one after another. Their circle was gathering again, but this time not for laughter. For damage control. I stood at my window, the steam from my tea clouding the glass, and decided I wouldn't let them have the last word. So I baked another pie. By the time it cooled, the clock read 9 p.m. I wrapped it in foil, slid it into my carrier, and crossed the street once more. My steps were slow, deliberate, each one ringing like a drumbeat in the cold night air. This time I didn't knock lightly. I rapped hard enough that the room inside fell silent. The door opened. Marjorie's face appeared, pale, her hair out of place. Ruth, she breathed, not with welcome but with dread. I lifted the pie slightly. Thought I'd bring dessert. Without waiting, I stepped inside. Their table was cluttered now. Ledgers open, papers scattered, glasses half drained. Panic hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Every face turned to me, eyes wide, mouths tight. I set the pie down in the center of the table, unwrapping the foil. You've all been busy, I said softly. Gary shot to his feet. You had no right. I raised a hand, silencing him. No right. You stole from the very people you toast with. You bled this neighborhood dry while pretending to raise funds for playgrounds and repairs. And you thought no one would notice. Marjorie's voice shook. Do you have any idea what you've done? The whole town. Yes, I cut in. The whole town knows. And they'll keep knowing. Because I gave them proof. Denise collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Gary cursed under his breath, pacing. But it was Marjorie who held my gaze, her fury simmering beneath forced composure. You think this makes you a hero? She hissed. You've destroyed everything. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. No, Marjorie. You destroyed yourselves. I just lit the lamp so everyone could see. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then I lifted the pie cutter from the counter, slicing neat portions. I placed one on a plate and raised it like a glass. To honesty, I said. No one touched their forks. They sat frozen, trapped by the truth laid bare. And for the first time I felt the weight of their power shift, away from them back into my hands. I stood, leaving the pie behind, and walked out without another word. The night air was cold, but inside me burned something warmer than anger. At home, Ellen waited by the window. When she saw me return, her shoulders dropped with relief. Is it over? She asked. I hung up my cardigan, smoothing the fabric with careful hands. Yes, I said. It's over. We ate quietly, just the two of us. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Safe. After dinner, I poured a glass of wine, not iced tea, not coffee, and stood in my kitchen where it had all begun. The counters gleamed under the soft light, the oak tree's shadow stretching long across the lawn outside. I lifted my glass, not to the neighbors, not to the circle I'd broken, but to myself. To the silence that had carried me. To the patience that had sharpened into strength. To the truth that had finally come to light. My voice was steady as I whispered into the quiet. To the house. To the peace they couldn't steal. And to the toast they'll never forget. I drank deep, the taste strong and clean. The kind of taste that lingers. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about shouting louder than the ones who wrong you. It's about choosing the moment they can't ignore, and making it yours. And in that moment, with the glass in my hand and my daughter safe beside me, I knew one truth above all. They would never laugh in my kitchen again. If this story struck a chord with you, don't leave just yet. Subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories that remind us, silence can be the sharpest weapon of all.